Towards the end of the PS3 and Xbox 360 generation, we were gifted by a game-changing fantasy RPG that not only pushed the boundaries of what console could do, but also the action RPGs as we knew them. I'm of course talking about the critically acclaimed The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. But believe it or not, there was another fantasy RPG that released shortly after Skyrim that was sadly largely forgotten about, or so we thought. Dragon's Dogma is a game I have heard brought up, well, not exactly often, but often enough for it to be on my backlog for a very long time, achieving somewhat of a cult classic status. And once Capcom decided to announce the sequel in the most thrilling way you could announce a new game, on a t-shirt, I finally decided to jump into this experience. This is for a few reasons. First of all, there's something about playing games from this era that is just really fitting, but mostly because medieval fantasy is my first true love, and I will always be drawn to experiences in that style. This game is an action-adventure based RPG set in a European medieval fantasy world that was initially inspired by Sicily. While the game is made by Japanese developers Capcom, they made the deliberate decision to seek inspiration from more Western-based RPGs such as The Elder Scrolls and Fable. And that inspiration is certainly felt through, but also does a lot of its own unique elements that shine through, giving this game unique perspective. The game opens right into the experience, exploring a dungeon with a set character that everyone refers to as Arisen, chasing down a dragon. This section acts as a tutorial, and we will learn the base combat and movement of the game. Slaying the beast leads to a very unclimactic finish, and we move to the main game, with this tutorial section seemingly largely irrelevant, at least for now. We create our own character here, and there are some interesting aspects here. Of course, the normal ones, customizing features like hair, face, and the like, but you can customize height, weight, build, and have all of these have tangible effects on your character, with things like their speed, stamina, and how much they can carry. I'm personally not one for huge amounts of detail in my creator characters, but given that these options were both visually very important as well as statistically to the game, I really appreciate the thought and dedication here by the team. The game opens with a cutscene of a peaceful fishing village, and your character existing there before a large red dragon comes down to attack. Your character is the only one to attempt to fight the dragon. Once you're passed out, the dragon steals your heart, yet you survive, heartless, and when you wake up, the dragon communicates to you. You are the Arisen, granted power and the quest to take down the dragon and take back your heart. This is the inciting incident and the purpose and motivation to quest around the world of Granzus, and level up to be able to take down the dragon. As far as openings go, I feel this is a very solid one for the time. The opening tutorial may seem a bit pointless narrative-wise, as not much is really explained, but quickly gets you into the highlight of the experience, and will quickly get you into the mechanics and give you a taste of what they can be once you get into your own experience. As well as opening with the dragon in fantasy, I'm a sucker for a peaceful small village. Something goes wrong there, motivating the protagonist to explore the world. And I like how I put the dragon as our main enemy front and center right from the beginning, as well as giving our main character a reason for being different and to be referred to as Arisen. What really grabbed me about this game initially was its combat, and particularly how much better it was than equivalent experiences at the time. And the secret to why this was, is the development team. The team at Capcom was well versed in action gameplay, because the team that made Dragon's Dogma is largely the same team that had just previously made Devil May Cry 4, leading to a very natural and satisfying feel to the combat, as well as many unique enemy designs that always gave variety. And variety is really the key word that describes this combat loop, as it is primarily built on all the things you can do in different ways to approach. And this is mostly done through the vocation system. Vocations are like a class, and when you open the game and you choose one of three, fighter, mage, or strider, they determine what weapons you can use, both in your primary and secondary categories, such as swords and shields for the fighter, magic stars for the mage, or a bow and daggers for the strider. I absolutely love swords and will gravitate towards them in any game they exist, so I originally went with the fighter vocation for this reason. I say originally because wonderfully in this game, you aren't limited to just one, you can change your vocation throughout the game, When I could, I changed to the Mystic Knight, allowing me magical shields to combine magic with my primary sword-based playstyle, being able to light my own blade on fire or have a dark magic that affect enemies when I successfully counter them with my shield. Later on I chose the Assassin class, which still allowed me to have a sword as my primary weapon, but I got to have a bow and secondary, allowing for range attacks, changing up my playstyle again. Even going through 3 vocations, I feel like I only scratched the surface of this system, as there are 9 in total. 3 base vocations with evolutions of that such with the fighter, and then the warrior who's able to use larger weapons like the great sword and warhammer, or combinations such as the magic archer to use magic bows and daggers and staffs. It really speaks to the role-playing nature of this game, and our huge variety and choice that exists in just the combat element of this game. Not only this, but they are directly involved in special abilities. There are 3 abilities you have per weapon, and you use some of your stamina to affect your combat. There are very basic ones leading to devastating attacks, such as the sword strike, ones I mentioned before where you can use magic to enhance your weapons in offensive and defensive ways. So within these vocations, there are so many different ways to customize them even further. As well as all this, vocations have a rank that increases the more you use it, so the more you put into a vocation, the more you get out of it, which is really rewarding within itself, but can also create the feeling of not wanting to change if you've invested too much time into one already, which I felt throughout the game and wished I had experimented more after being done. Of course, the equipment you get is deeply involved with your vocation, just as weapons and armor only being able to use for certain vocations, and weapons and armor come in lots of different ways. I found most common I was buying them from the shop in Grand Seren, but you would get rewarded in quests with new ones or simply find them throughout the world, leading to very simple but rewarding upgrade paths for these. A wonderful mechanic for the combat is that of grabbing, which feels greatly inspired by Shadow of the Colossus, where for big monsters such as trolls, it is in essentially melee-based vocations to climb onto these creatures to access their weak points, and slash their feet will do extremely little. This does affect your stamina though, and I felt that while this system was sometimes wonderful, it was also not nearly as well controlling as I think it should have been, and is a clear point of improvement in the sequel. The world has lots of different enemy designs, from humans such as bandits and raiders who are relatively easy to take down, but they also have vocations that level up throughout the game. Goblins, which are easiest cannon fodder, harpies, which are annoying aerial fodder, particularly if you're not ranged, to beasts such as griffin, trolls, and all types of different enemies that have different weaknesses, and always you need to adapt to different combat scenarios to be successful. As well as, there are also consumables. Potions can be bought or made, as well as even using raw plants can lead to things like healing, stamina lifting curses, and other such benefits when in combat, adding another layer to these encounters. While I would say in general, a lot of Western-based RPGs combat feels like a weakness, I actually feel like in Dragon's Dogma's biggest strength, and it feels firmly rooted in the action RPG space. One of the highest praise that this game gets is its pawn system. This game has companions in a sense of that of the pawns. You start off customizing your own pawn using the same character creator that you use for the creation of yourself, and this is the pawn that will accompany you throughout your journey. You can also pick their vocation and change their vocation as well as abilities, weapons, and armor, just like you can yourself. On top of this, you can also have 2 other pawns that you get from the Void. These are actually other players' pawns they've created and customized, and they come in with their own abilities as well as knowledge. And say a pawn that you pick up has already completed a quest that you're doing, this pawn will give you information and tips on completing it. Not only this, but your main pawn can be summoned by other players and come back with information from quests they do with other players and areas they explore. The pawn system here I feel is really great. I loved having a connection to my own pawn and getting to pick from a huge variety of other ones. Of course, seeing other people's pawns, it's very obvious how horny a lot of people were when they created them, leading to some questionable outfit choices, choosing style over stats. But it really comes into the feeling of fellowship, going around and questing, as they are extremely useful at exploring and fighting, giving you directions and tips and adapting to your playstyle to help with the weakness of the enemies you're fighting. The one main downside with the pawns is that they feel like an element that's really only gameplay included. And what I mean by that is, there's nothing really interesting about the pawns in a story or lore setting, which to me is just such a missed opportunity. They have their own guild area and aren't allowed into places like the Palace, and I thought we'd get quests to be able to see how pawns are treated like lesser citizens, and even some lore about where the pawns come from and who they are. But really, none of that just kind of ever happens, and it just feels very jarring. This game oozes PS3 and 360 era charm. The games from that time have such a distinct style. They're getting close to realistic graphics, but not quite there, the saturated colours, and enough blocky architecture. It's always a treat to play games from this time. It's an open world game though, but it still has lots of those loading screens when entering new regions or cities. While this game is open world, it feels a lot more like interconnected paths that lead to wider areas and then again into natural corridors. This is a great feeling of exploration though, as it has a traditional fog system with the map, so you don't know what's out there or how much of it until you reach. I did find exploring the world of Granzas to be a little annoying though, both with the markers on the map not being implemented incredibly well, but particularly through the stamina system. Look, I understand and even appreciate the stamina system within combat, but trying to explore this world in a meaningful way, the stamina system just feels like it deliberately disincentivizes me to explore, making the process all that more painful. And there isn't even any system like mounts that can improve this. The only thing this game does have is a fast travel system, but outside of one for Casadus and one for Grand Seren, you have to manually find waystones and place them in specific areas to return to. But I found these hard to find, thus leading to needing to travel on foot to a lot of places multiple times too. The world does feel diverse though. There are coastlines and beaches, rocky and windy mountain passes, forests and rivers, fields and farms, all that would be expected in a fantasy game like this, and particularly where a lot of the time is spent in the capital city of Grand Seren. Shops have specific usefulness within this world. There are many general travelling shopkeepers with basic items, and then more specialised ones, such as the one in Grand Seren as the blacksmith and herbalist. From here, there are consumables and weapons and armour unique to those places. Many of these shopkeepers though are real characters, and though doing quests to them, they grant more items and even discounted rates, leading to a very specific reward system for the player. Inns in this game function in a fantastic way. In a fantasy novel, inns are essential to the world, and it isn't represented as much in games, but inns here serve a purpose as a place of rest, resetting health, and changing the day or night cycle, as well as storing and withdrawing items, changing vocations and abilities. They're really a one-stop shop to customizing and changing your character, and a great place to constantly return to at the end of your quest. Of course, in a fantasy RPG, there may be no other element more important than the questing. Going out with your party and doing tasks, slaying beasts, finding lost artifacts, and helping the general public is how most of the experience in this game is. And quests come in a few different ways. First is the main questline and main story, which I'll get into more later, but this game has an abundance of side quests, but not all of them are great to be honest. A lot of the places that you visit, there are notice boards where you can accept different quests. The vast majority of these are things like slay 45 direwolves, with the reward of experience and coin. I picked up a lot of these at the start, and I didn't focus on them as I naturally got through the game. I completed a fair amount of them. But these sort of quests are never interesting enough to motivate me to do on my own, and I would only consider if I was going for some sort of completion. On top of this though, main quests can be gained from talking to people throughout the world. People with quests available have a coloured box above them, indicating that. These are more interesting and generally involve doing specific tasks, killing specific monsters, fetching specific things, escorting people to specific areas, talking to other people to convince them to do things, and it feels far more in line with quests and missions of this gameplay era. These aren't fantastic, but they do help create the fantasy in which we are participating in. A lot of the side quests are specific to events happening through the main quest though, and are offshoots of them, such as when you have the worm license, a lot about interesting beasts and taking them down. When you move from working from the palace, conspiracies and secret organizations and the nobles of the court have different side missions you can do to manipulate the politics of the events happening there. And perhaps the most notable is that of the Duchess, finding the psychotic nature of the Duke that is affecting her and how this game, not so subtly, tries to influence a romance between the Arisen and the Duchess. I did find it funny how I literally was hiding in the Duchess's chamber, stopped the Duke from killing her, and then arrested, escape, and then immediately be able to talk to the Duke as if nothing had happened. Also, in any RPG, I love to play a specific way. I love using multiple saves to go back and make different choices and see different results instead of doing them on entirely new playthroughs, as I like to do it as I go. Well, this game has no multiple save function, as well as it auto-saves constantly throughout the game. So not only can't I go back and make different choices, when certain things happen, such as getting locked out of a specific quest because what happened I did in another one, I can't go back as the game auto-saves it at its completion. This caused a lot of frustration for me, and I felt completely railroaded into what had happened in my first try, and honestly, it made me disconnect from a lot of characters and quests that I was in the middle of completing. The main quest of this game is all about your journey as the Arisen to eventually slay the dragon. In fact, the Arisen's presence is tumultuous, as the dragon attacking signifies the end of the world to many, and some don't believe in the Arisen at all, and others have organizations to help bring forth the ending or take control during it. The main story is pretty simple though, but it is still solid, I would say. Starting out as a peaceful person made Arisen, you prove yourself by killing beasts for the Royal Guard and doing quests for them. Things like killing the Hydras and the Griffins gets you promoted to working directly for one of the Duke's nobles, in which more of this ensues, but also a lot of politics, in fact being the only one gathering evidence for a trial, as well as issues within the nobles and the hierarchy of the Royal Guards. This eventually comes to finding where the dragon is and going after him. This sequence is a lot of fun, and feels like for a short time much more linear. It also represents your choices in a way, as the dragon has captured your beloved, which is an NPC with great affection towards you. I got the Duchess as I saved her from the Duke, and had, well, questionable morals with most other people. The game tries really hard for the Duchess to be your beloved in any case though, even though a lot of other characters are available. Although the final fight with the dragon is not one I was a fan of, as a Mystic Knight at the time with no ranged attack and only one specific way to attack the dragon's heart was a long, tedious process of holding on and slashing the heart a few times and falling off, only to wait for my stamina to reset and try again. The gravitas of the final encounter was great, but the actual gameplay I wasn't intrigued by. Of course, this ends with slaying the dragon and recovering your heart. The consequence is that the world is plunged into a permanent darkness, with much of Grand Seren collapsing into a giant hole. While we do see credits, I wouldn't exactly call this the end, as after we can return to Grand Seren and see an older, disheveled Duke we have to fight, clearly drawing some power from the dragon to stay young. A quick fight with him, we are surrounded by guards and called a traitor and thrown into the giant hole that has emerged and collapsed much of Grand Seren. What precedes here is a series of dungeons with different bosses needing to defeat a variety of them to collect wake stones. And in fact, I found these dungeons and these boss fights to be some of the most engaging of all combat encounters throughout the game. Though once you have 20 wake stones, you can enter another portal, leaving you to fighting with the previous Arisen. And this is the guy that you played as in the tutorial. Once you defeat him, you can take his place in the void and can still return to Granzus. A fixed and beautiful Granzus, but you merely are a spirit to observe and can't interact. I love this aspect of needing to defeat who you played as the tutorial and learning the history of the lore that you played as a previous Arisen before your current one. Though, piercing your own heart will return you to the beach where you first lost it, your beloved coming to escort you away, and when the actual credit sequence starts before the game ends and starts you in a new game plus. The main story really isn't anything special. A lot of one-dimensional characters are moving from quest to quest, but I do think there's a lot of great ideas here. The hunt for the dragon, the political intrigue, moving your way up and proving yourself throughout your actions, and I love the ending, finding the previous Arisen and taking their spot. And apparently, if you succeed in a new game plus, the Arisen you find isn't the one from the tutorial, but the one from your first playthrough, with the armor and weapons and abilities that you ended that on. And I just think that's really meta and cool, even if I didn't have the interest in completing New Game Plus. Dragon's Dogma is not a fantastic game, but a game with fantastic potential. The combat and world is easy to pick up and get lost in, but a lot of elements do take you out of the experience. It feels like a game that was a generation too early or didn't spend enough time in development, and from what we've already seen and know of the sequel, it appears they're taking what made the first game special, with vocations, pawns, combat, and more, and combining with the innovations in gaming since then, the new races, cities, stories, and world that we're seeing. Dragon's Dogma is still easily worth playing if you're a fan of this genre and these type of games, and want to prepare for the sequel. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, please leave a like. Let me know what your thoughts are on Dragon's Dogma in the comments below. Have you played this game? Are you excited to play it? Are you waiting for the sequel? Have you been anticipating it since you first played this game many years ago? If you'd like to see more, please subscribe. Until then, cheers and have a good one.